Hi everyone, thanks for joining in. Just want to introduce you all to Angela Slater. So Angela is an Australian writer of dark fantasy and horror. Her latest publication is All the Murmuring Bones, which is a gothic fairy tale novel. And she's won lots of awards: World Fantasy Award, a British Fantasy Award, a Ditmar Award, and an Australian Shadows Award. And she's also the author of Verity Fassbinder's urban fantasy supernatural crime series and 10 short story collections. She is a PhD, teaches for the Australian Writers' Centre, and is trying to finish her latest new Gothic novel. So thanks so much for joining us, Angela. Just want to also mention that thanks to New South Publishing, that if anyone asks a question during the Facebook Live, you'll have a chance to win a copy of All the Murmuring Bones. So I've got my copy here as well.
Cool. That's that one. That's the British one. It's got the foil on it.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, the fancy one.
Yeah, it is fancy. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Just wondering if you want to start off by telling us a little bit about All the Murmuring Bones.
Sure. This one is sort of it's sort of sprung from my dislike of the Little Mermaid, basically. I thought, mermaids would probably be a very different creature to what we see from Disney. Mm. And I had a character in my head, Mirren O'Malley, and she's basically the last daughter of a failing house that's once been very rich and very powerful. And it's just her and her grandmother now, and her grandfather having died, and the start of the story is burying him, and her thinking, okay, well, what's my life going to be now when my grandmother goes? Then I'm free. What will I do? But her grandmother has other plans to get the family fortune back and to get family position back. So they end up at loggerheads about that, and Mirren ends up sort of on a journey across country and encountering a lot of strange obstacles, shall we say. Sort of fairy tale, fantasy, gothic, horror. The Royal Sampler.
Yeah. And could you tell us what was the first idea you had when you started writing the book?
I was thinking about, actually, and it's something that hasn't been it's not in the book, because when I started it, I thought she'd be fleeing across the sea. So it was a girl on a boat, on a ship. But she runs away from the sea. So I didn't end up using that. But it was just that. But it's very much about ideas of home and family, and the family that you make for yourself, I think, which is really important, because sometimes the family you're born to aren't particularly comfortable for you.
Yeah.
Exactly. That was it.
Exactly, yeah. And just wonder, do you want to talk us a little bit about your other books and what sort of,
Yeah, there's a few of them.
Yeah, there are. Yeah.
Well, All the Murmuring Bones is set in the sort of the fairy tale world that I made up for my other collections, Sourdough and Other Stories, The Bitterwood Bible, and The Tallow Wife, and the novel that I have actually finished it. I've just finished it. It's been known as Morewood for quite some time, but it's now called The Path of Thorns.
Okay.
And so that's another fairy tale gothic. It's kind of like Frankenstein meets Jane Eyre.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I'm pretty happy with that one.
Yeah.
That's sort of the fairy tale-y part of what I do. The other series, the Verity Fassbinder series, is sort of urban fantasy set in Brisbane. The first book ends up with sort of a fight between angels and sirens above the Brisbane River. The second book is called Corpse Light. That sort of deals with the underworld and broken angels. And the third one is kind of the wrap up. You know, how do you keep the city safe? How do you keep the weird population, which are, you know, just the vampires and the werewolves and all the other mix of strange creatures that have come here with European settlers. How do you keep them and the normal population separated? How do you keep everything secret?
Yeah.
So I think that's my main stuff. I've actually got 11 short story collections now. So
yeah, you have been busy.
Yes, yeah.
And are some of your books series?
Yeah, Vigil is a series, and the sort of the Sourdough World collections are sort of a loose, you know, nebulous, joined thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is fantasy something you'd always been interested? Like when you were a child growing up, what sort of books did you used to read?
Yeah, that was it. Well, you know, Mum was always reading fairy tales and that kind of thing. And when I started reading for myself, Alice in Wonderland, you know, the usual gateway drug, anything by Tolkien. I found Tanith Lee. Sorry, I'm just looking up on my shelves. So I found Tanith Lee when I was probably 10. Lynn Abbey, Nancy Kress. Later on, I sort of found Barbara Hambling and her James Asher vampire series. So I just sort of kept reading, you know, then finding Stephen King and more into horror, going back into the classics with Poe, reading, but also reading other, you know, anything I could find, thrillers and romance, not a huge amount of nonfiction. Don't really like real things. And just reading crime, Wilbur Smith, everything, absolutely everything. And I think that's why it's one of the reasons I love writing so much now, is because I'm sort of pulling in a lot of those skills that I was learning just as I was reading. And sort of going, oh, I learned that from so-and-so and I learned that from so-and-so. So whenever I teach, I always say to people, don't, you know, think that, oh, I don't like science fiction, so I won't read it. Because if you want to write, you want all sorts of skills. Yeah. And you will read them from reading really, really widely. Yeah.
And had writing been something you thought you would always do? And I'm interested to know how you started off. And
yeah, it was something I always wanted to do, but you know, all responsible parents tell their children not to become a writer or an artist because they'll starve. And it's quite right. So I for a long time I didn't think I would ever be able to do it. I didn't know how you wrote a book, how you wrote a story. These were just these magnificent, magical things that appeared. And then I got into the point when I was about 37. I thought, oh, I want to give this a go. I'd been scribbling, but never really sending anything anywhere. And I just thought I want to give it a go and see if I can do this. Because I'd rather, you know, I don't want to go to my grave thinking, oh, wish I'd done that. So that was 17 years ago now. So I sort of started at QUT actually doing a graduate diploma just to learn the basics of writing. And then I went on to do a master's in creative writing. And all of the short stories I wrote for that were published, which just encouraged me, really. It was quite foolish. Then I started to do a PhD, which I did finish. And my collection, Sourdough, ended up being the PhD creative work for that.
Yeah.
So I was very lucky in that just about everything I wrote found a home early on.
Yeah.
And I was more a short story writer than anything. So I'm good at those. And then it was terrifying trying to write a novel because it's, oh my God, they're so long. I don't know if you've noticed, but they're so long. And my specialty is taking words out. I had to learn to put them back in. So, yeah.
Yeah. We've got quite a few people watching, which is really great, and some questions coming through. So Sarah Joy's wondering if you grew up in Brisbane. Is that why you used Brisbane in your...
No, my mum was born in Ipswich. My dad was born in I think Brisbane, but mostly grew up on farms around Nambour and Gympie. I was born in Cairns because my dad was a copper, so we moved around a lot. So I was born up there. We came down to Ipswich when I was 3, I think, out to Longreach when I was 9 for 18 months, and back up to Cairns, and then back to Ipswich. Okay. But I've lived in Sydney as well, but I've lived in Brisbane most of my life. So when I was, the way the Vigil, the first of the urban fantasy series came about, I did a course called Clarion South, which was 6 weeks of writing boot camp. And you write a story once a week for 6 weeks, and then you go into a room to have it critiqued by 15, 16 other writers. And I'd always go first because I'd rather just get it over and done with. So Sunday night, I was always madly writing a story, thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? And it was Brisbane summer, and, there's a combination of In Excess and Powderfinger on the radio. And I started to think about noir detective stories. And I thought, well, how do you put that in Brisbane? How do you make it, a bit different? And that was kind of where that came from. So I had this detective called Verity Fassbinder who wears Doc Martens and has a really smart mouth. Comes from a strange kind of a family background. And again, that's another one of those books that has sort of the themes of found family, and because she starts out as a very alone person. By the end of the 3rd book, she's got a partner and a child and these people and a mother, an uncle, and all this family that sort of return to her, and friends who are really important. So again, I have my themes that I like to go back to. That's one of them. But it was just sort of the Brisbane River and West End. They feature very heavily in those books because they're kind of weird areas.
Belinda wonders who has been your favourite character to create.
Oh gosh, that's really quite hard. I have a character called Patience Sykes who features throughout Sourdough, Bitterwood, and a novella I wrote for Tor.com called Of Sorrow and Such. And she's very ruthless and very practical. She's a witch. And the people she loves, she will defend to the death. But the people she does not like, they're really seriously in trouble. I think she's really fun to write because it's, you think, oh, okay, well, I get to be this character at the moment. And if I had no moral qualms, if no one was going to arrest me, what would I do? So, what would I do to the people who are really pissing me off at the moment? Which is very freeing. So I think I'd probably have to go with Patience. She's probably my favourite.
Sounds like an interesting character. Kelly's wondering if your new novel that you mentioned is a standalone or part of a series.
It's a standalone. I don't know if I'll go back and visit Mirren again. Maybe. But at the moment, she's a standalone. The next one, Path of Thorns, is a standalone. It's about a character called Asher Todd who goes to an old, again, Gothic house in a remote area. with plans of her own.
Okay.
And I have another one that isn't contracted yet with Titan or New South, but I'm hoping they'll take it, called The Briar Book of the Dead. And it's about a young girl called Annie Briar who grows up as the only girl in a witch family that doesn't have any powers.
Okay.
Yeah, so and all three books have got grandmothers in it, so I've started referring to it as the Bad Grandmother trilogy. But, yeah, so they all stand alone, but they're all in the same world.
Yeah,
So.
okay. And you sound like you have written a lot of books. How many are you, like, how long is it taking you to write? I know you said you do short stories, which,
Yeah,
yeah.
gosh, I think the Vigil, which was my first novel, it probably took me 5 years.
Okay.
And that's because I did stupid things like say, I'm not smart enough to write this as a novel. I don't know what I'm doing. I know what I'll do. I'll write 3 novellas and jam them together. Now, I would not wish that upon my worst enemy. So that took 5 years. The next one, Quartzite, took 18 months because I knew a bit better what I was doing.
Yeah.
I knew structure. And Restoration took 12 months. But All the Memory Bones took me 2 years, and Morewood's probably taken me 2 years. So that's kind of, includes thinking time and, staring into space, and false starts and rewriting and that kind of thing until you finally go, right, yes, I've got a bit between my teeth and I know what this is about. The short story collections that are in the sourdough world, sourdough probably took 2 years to put together. The Bitterwood Bible took a year to put together, and The Tallow Wife took me 7 years to write.
Okay.
To my shame. So,
was that one of your earlier ones, though?
No, The Tallow Wife just came out in February this year.
Okay.
So it just...
So had you been writing others at the same time?
I've been writing other things,
yeah,
and having, a crisis of confidence because the Bitterwood Bible had won the World Fantasy Award, and then I was thinking, oh my God, anything else I do after this is just going to be pale in comparison. I have to stop writing. So it took me 7 years to get over that one. But it just, it depends on the content. Also, if you've got a contract for it, that adds a bit of a cattle prod to your speed.
Yeah. And your new novel, Morewood, is that out next year?
Yes, that will be June next year.
Yeah. Yeah. And are you someone who has lots and lots of things going on in your brain for many, many more books to come?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And how do you handle all that?
Well, again, it's a matter of sort of going, okay, what have I done the most on? What do I know best? What am I enjoying at the moment? You will invariably find as a writer that the thing you're meant to be writing is going to be far less attractive than the thing that doesn't have a contract on it. Because you can just, it's fun. It has no, there's no obligation on that one, but you need to finish this one.
Yeah.
So you sort of spend a fair bit of time going, while you're doing that. But I always have a couple of short stories and a novella going.
Yeah.
At the moment, I've also got a graphic novel project that I can't tell you what it is. And there's some film consulting stuff that I'm doing.
Okay. Sounds exciting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's good to be able to keep doing different things. Yeah.
And what about research? How much research do you need to do?
Depends on the story, and because, I'm not writing historical fiction, so I'm not worried about any particular kind of accuracy generally. I'm just trying to pick interesting ideas out. There's a story in the sourdough world called something, I can't remember what it's called, Ash. It's called Ash. And one of the story seeds for that was I was reading Alison Weir's book about Isabelle She-Wolf of France, which is historical fiction, historical biography. And there's a story about how Isabel the Queen was burned in fire at some point, but there's not much information about it. And I thought, oh, that would be a really interesting idea if I have this character who's been very beautiful and she's been burned. So she's done a deal with this witch to get her beauty back, because her beauty is basically the thing that keeps her as the mistress of a rich man, keeps her position. So what would she give up in order to have that back? So I will read a lot of that sort of stuff and just take little bits and bend them to my will. So sometimes I'll just be reading fairy tales just for a bit of inspiration. And if there's something specific, I will do the research on it, but mostly because sort of my sourdough world is something that it's close to our world, to sort of a mix of a Victorian / medieval / Renaissance mashup. A lot of that's just from my being a history nerd, and the things that I'd like to see, dresses I'd like to see. And I work with a friend, Kathleen Jennings, who's a writer and also an artist. And she's done quite a few of my covers and illustrations. So I'll sort of sit there and say, well, what about this? What about this? Oh, I found this one over here. So she'll go off and work with all my insane ideas and present me with something that's always amazing.
Yeah, no, that's interesting you said that, because Belinda was just asking, she said your cover looks very enticing, and she wondered how much input you had in the cover.
Absolutely none on this one. On this one, it was just Kath, who's my editor, does up a brief for the art department and sort of says, here's the imagery that goes through it, goes through this book. And I honestly had no idea what they would do with it. And when it came back, it was just, it's so beautiful. It's a friend in the States had her husband make me this gorgeous piece of steel art, which is sort of the waves and and the harp and the fishtail in there. So yeah, I've been very fortunate with my covers over the years. So just waiting for the next one, for the Path of Thorns / Morewood, to see what they do with that.
Yeah. And Kelly's wondering what urban fantasy book or series you would recommend for a teenager who's obsessed by this genre.
Oh, good heavens. I will have to get you a list. If I can post a list later.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I can absolutely do that. But off the top of my head, I could not help you.
No, that sounds good.
Yep.
And Kelly also wonders how you, do you come up with the title, or is that something that the editor or publishers?
No, I come up with the title, but I'm open, to, I like having a working title, because as I tell my students, if you give it a title, it's it feels real and it feels like yours, and it's a proper thing, rather than just my project, just my story. It's got a name. So All the Memory Bones was called Morewood. No, it wasn't. It was called Blackwater, because that's the name of one of the estates in that book. Morewood was known as Morewood because that's where it was. So I sort of went, I'm just going to go with location names. And so we just had to do a bit of back and forth and looking up poetry books and fairy tale books and that sort of thing to try and find, the new title that would go with Morwood.
yeah.
So that was The Path of Thorns, which is sort of based a bit on the old versions of Little Red Riding Hood. There's one called The Path of Needles and the one called The Path of Pins. And my friend Alison Littlewood in the UK has a book called The Path of Needles. So couldn't use that one, but we were thinking about thorns because, you know, there's a lot of thorn imagery in fairy tales, and the castles, Sleeping Beauty's castle was covered with thorns and briars. So that was sort of how we landed on that one. But I haven't had anything else in my back catalogue renamed. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested to know what you like reading now yourself, and maybe if there's anything you have read lately that you want to recommend to us.
Yes. And I can't find my copy of it, but I did just finish For the Wolf by Hannah Whitten, who's an American writer. I finished this not long ago, which is The Tangleroot Palace by Marjorie Liu, who does the amazing graphic novel Monstress. I'm partway through this one, The Cunning Women by Elizabeth Lee, which is about the Pendle witches in the UK and one of the big witch trials. Lucy Holland's Sister Song, which is sort of a reimagining of Arthurian legend, which is amazing. And no, can't find that one either. But it's I read this one a while ago, and I still tell people about it. Alex E. Harrow's The Once and Future Witches, which is fantastic. And she's got a really good novella from Tor called A Spindle Splintered, which is hard to say, but very easy to read.
Well, yeah, thanks for those recommendations. Sounds like some great ones there. And there were some really amazing covers as well, it looked like. Some really stunning covers. Cassie's wondering if you have a favourite fairy tale.
I have had the one that I always remember, and I always sort of blame for my career, which is The Little Match Girl. Not because I particularly love it, but because it was the one that traumatized me the most.
Oh, really?
The first time reading it, you know. And so it was also the first one I rewrote when I started writing. Yeah, and I, you know, a lot of... although I do love the Goose Girl, which is, you know, the girl who's a princess who escapes her father. It's also Donkey Skin as well. They're very close, you know, in the story. And she's loses her position in life, but manages to find her way back. Anything that's got pretty frocks in it, so I like those ones. So, yeah, and I like mashing them up, and I like making them a bit different, and sort of doing something that's not quite so, oh, the prince must rescue me kind of thing. Yeah. So.
And when you were a child, did you used to write your own fairy tales?
Not writing them down. I didn't used to do that, but I would retell them in my head.
Okay.
So if I didn't like an ending, I'd start thinking, well, no, I didn't like how that finished. How would I finish it? I'd do it this way. So it took me a while before I sort of started putting pen to paper.
And before, I think we mentioned you teach at the Australian Writers Centre. Just wondering if there's any budding writers watching, if you could give them a tip of what you would say if they want to get into the fantasy genre.
Read widely. Don't be a snob about what you're reading. You should always keep learning. I think that's really important. You can always learn new techniques, and you can always be reminded of things that you've forgotten. I would normally say make sure you go to conventions, but of course we can't go anywhere at the moment. And try and get a good writers group together that you can support each other and critique each other's work and just try and get better and better. And the other thing is that eventually you have to let your stories go and you have to send them out somewhere, because no one's going to know that you've got the most brilliant short story in the world in your bottom drawer. So be brave. Be brave. It's the only way we get out there.
And have you had any authors in your classes that are up and coming authors that you'd like to tell us to look out for?
I do not have anyone at the moment who is currently at that point of publishing. I have Al Campbell, who is one of my private clients, and she has a contract with UQP for her novel, which will be out next year. And it's called, I cannot remember. I will note that down and we can put that on the website again. Sorry, I can't get the title. So that is going to be amazing when that comes out. But I'm hoping to see some of my students getting towards their novels published within the next year or so. But again, it takes quite a while to get there. You get your first draft done and you think you've finished. Well, you haven't. I'm very sorry. It will just to to sort of a real life writer example. I probably did 3 drafts of All the Murmuring Bones. Went to my editor. I had 3 edits back and forth with her. Then I had 2 edits back and forth with the copy editor. And then I had another 2 rounds with the proofreader. So in all of those areas, someone's going to ask you, oh, does this work, or does this work, and I think this should be removed, or can you add something else here? So you are constantly reworking it until you get the damn thing in your hands.
And if you could tell something to yourself when you first started out writing, what would that be?
It's all going to be okay. You're going to require all of your stubbornness and all of your determination, but keep going and keep learning. That's the other thing. Be adaptable. That makes a really big difference. You can have your sulky fit at home, but don't do it in public.
And what do you hope that readers love about your books?
I think the characters. And just not wanting to leave the world. I think I had someone on Facebook tell me the other week, or it might have been Twitter, to sort of say, well, I hope you're happy with yourself. I kept sneaking away from my guests at the barbecue and going and reading in the bathroom to finish the story, and just sort of saying, no, it's finished. I don't want it to be finished. I have to go back to this world, kind of thing. So what else can I do? I'm like, all right, well, there's quite a few books. There's quite a few books in the in that world, and I'll keep writing as long as I can, as long as I'm interested as well, and I don't sort of suddenly feel that I'm writing the same thing over and over again. But yeah, the characters and just loving being in the world. I think that's what I want people to really pick, and enjoy.
Well, thanks so much for talking to me. Been great chatting to you. Cheers. And just wondering if you want to tell people how they can keep in touch with you.
Yep, you can find my website, which is angelaslater.com. I am on Facebook. I am on Instagram. Instagram's mostly pictures of food, books, and the dogs that I live with. Or Twitter. So generally social media. You can find me there. Sometimes I have opinions.
Well, thanks so much again, and thanks to everyone who joined in and the questions that people asked.
no worries. And I will answer those questions this evening.
Yeah.
So no worries.
Thank you.
On the site, not a problem.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much, everyone.